Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the Muslim holiday of Eid-al-Adha offers little respite to Sudanese caught up in the 10-week war between the army and the rapid support forces. Neither side respects a promised truce, and fighting reportedly intensifies around the city of Omdurman. Also, will they stay or will they go? Ahead of a UN Security Council vote on the fate of its peacekeeping force in Mali, we take a look at the ongoing instability in the country and the persistent extremist violence that's left hundreds dead since 2012. And as Sierra Leone's president returns for a second term after winning, we take a look at the promise and problems of the country's construction boom. The sand mining that's propped it up also brings with it serious environmental risks. But first, once again, a name-only truce fails to do much to halt fighting in Sudan. Both military factions behind the months-old conflict had agreed to pause the violence for the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha. But with airstrikes and gunfire rocking the capital, Khartoum, on Wednesday, clashes between the army and the RSF paramilitary appeared to have instead intensified in some of the surrounding cities. Bastia Renouy tells us more.
One more time, a ceasefire was announced in Sudan, and one more time it was not implemented. This time it was announced by both the army and the rapid support forces. The army said that it will stop fighting for 24 hours and the RSF for 2 days in order to let civilians celebrate Eid festivities everywhere in Sudan. And one more time, Khartoum residents said that they could still hear explosions, mostly in the city of Bari. It's a Khartoum neighboring city located on the other bank of the Nile, north of the capital. Civilians say that they can still see rapid support forces members hiding in civilian neighborhoods, and that the army is still bombing these areas, killing and injuring many civilians. That's for the situation in the capital. In Darfur, fighting continued as well during the past days in the cities of Nyala, El-Fashir and Zalinji, three of the main cities of Darfur. And finally, let's also mention the situation in El Geneina, this city located a few kilometers from the border with Chad. It's the capital of West Darfur. And there is no fighting at the moment between the army and the rapid support forces there, but the RSF and local militias allied to the RSF are still surrounding the cities, are still targeting civilians. According to local human rights organizations, ethnic cleansing are ongoing in this city. Thousands of people have been killed there. And for the first time since the beginning of the war, General Hemeti, the head of the rapid support forces, acknowledged that some of his men committed atrocities. He said that they will be judged, but it's impossible to believe him because the rapid support forces have been committing massacres for a decade, whether it's in Darfur or in Khartoum in 2019. They committed a massacre that ended the revolution, and since then, none of them has been judged. So there is very little chance to see any members of the RSF being judged in Sudan at the moment.
Bastien Renouy there for us. Look now at some news in brief. African countries have to decide for themselves whether they want to keep working with the Russian mercenary group Wagner. So says Moscow. The fighters, who have a large footprint across Africa, launched a brief mutiny against the Kremlin over the weekend. Meanwhile, the US has imposed sanctions on the company Midas Resources in Central African Republic, accusing it of using illicit gold dealings to fund Wagner's extensive operations in the country. There's relief for Zimbabwean migrants in South Africa after the High Court there ruled on Wednesday that the government's decision not to renew temporary residency permits for 180,000 people is unconstitutional. The 4-year visas were first granted to Zimbabwean refugees fleeing political violence at home in 2009. And were then repeatedly extended ever since. But in 2021, Pretoria said that there would be no more extensions after December 2022, which would have led to the mass expulsion of permit holders. And a former Rwandan military policeman has been found guilty of genocide by a Paris court. Philippe Hategekimana fled to France after the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis and those who supported them in Rwanda, in which over 800,000 people were slaughtered in just 100 days. Hategekimana was the fifth such trial in France of an alleged participant in the genocide. Now, a vote by the UN Security Council to end a UN peacekeeping mission in Mali called MINUSMA, upon request from Bamako, has been postponed until Friday. The country's been battling a jihadist insurgency since 2012, and Mali has turned away from Western support and instead been relying more on support from Russian Wagner mercenaries. Friday's vote on MINUSMA's fate will affect the movements of more than 12,000 deployed soldiers and police. Caroline Lambolet has more.
Its landmark monuments have been rebuilt, and its streets are once again bustling with activity. But in Timbuktu, in central Mali, the jihadist threat still looms large. Despite this, some locals say that they're keen for the UN's peacekeeping mission to leave the country.
It's been 8 years or more since MINUSMA arrived in Mali. Its mission is to maintain peace and stability, but it has failed in every respect. MINUSMA has failed. We haven't seen any considerable change when it comes to peace and stability.
Not all residents share the same opinion.
I think that the impact MINUSMA has had in Mali is indisputable. It's visible. You can see it.
Some cited economic arguments. MINUSMA employs thousands of Malian drivers, translators, analysts. It was created in 2013 after separatist rebels and jihadist insurgents occupied northern Mali. But since then, the authorities, which are now backed by Russia's Wagner paramilitary group, have drastically reduced the scope of the UN mission. Earlier this month, they called for it to withdraw without delay.
Unfortunately, MINUSMA seems to have become part of the problem by fueling inter-community tensions. This situation has generated a feeling of distrust among the population towards MINUSMA and a crisis of confidence between the Malian authorities and MINUSMA.
Over the past months, demonstrators have also urged the mission to leave. Elsewhere, protesters called for it to stay. Some fear that its departure will leave behind a security vacuum.
Now, Sierra Leone's president's been sworn in for a second term after winning the weekend's election. Julius Madabio returns, despite his main rival slamming the vote as being a sham. Now, he has a lot to prove the second time around. Some are concerned that the promise of the country's construction boom also entails serious environmental risks. Our correspondents report.
Sierra Leone's coastline has changed dramatically in less than 10 years. Every day, the coast is devoured by an army of workers with shovels. Some hotels have already been devastated by seawater rushing through these giant gushes. Some young people are giving up work on farms to harvest the sand instead.
Here now, sand mining beach. This is the place that we work to find our living. So I hope you see the guys that are working.
"15 to 20 trucks shuttle daily between the coast and the hinterland, carrying dozens of tons of sand."
As for now, my future is not bright. As for now, because it's not really easy for me. Because this work that I do, I don't have plenty of money here. So a lot of pains and small money that I have.
Obushi Kamara earns less than €5 a day. His father is the village chief of Tisana.
They need this to survive because they have no other resources. To avoid becoming thieves, this is what they do. If they had a job, they wouldn't be doing this.
The authorities turn a blind eye to this illegal sand harvesting. Sand is a non-renewable resource, and its extraction is catastrophic for the environment.
So sand mining is one of the most detrimental issues that have faced our environment in Sierra Leone. Our land cover has been going. The water has been claiming so much land, which has posed so much threat to people farming around. A lot of farmlands have gone, people raising animals have lost animals, and even graveyards, cemeteries have gone.
Sierra Leone is one of the 10 countries most at risk because of climate change. Beach sand mining exacerbates this vulnerability.
Well, Sembene Usman, one of the great figures of African cinema, would have turned 100 this year. He directed critically acclaimed films that reflected his passion for social justice, and he remains a creative pioneer. In his native Senegal, several events have been scheduled throughout the year in his honour. Sam Brad has been to some and tells us more.
La cuisine, la salle de bain, la chambre à coucher, le salon. Je ne fais que ça.
The film Black Girl first hit the big screen in 1966 and recounts the true story of a migrant worker's suicide in France. It was one of the first ever feature films directed by someone from sub-Saharan Africa. But Senegal's Usman Sembene was more than a director. He was a renowned author, Pan-Africanist and activist. He also fought in the Second World War, worked on the railways and on the docks of Marseille. Specialists, like Professor Kassé, say his works still resonate today.
His areas of interest are still very relevant today. Issues of cultural alienation, of class in African society, questions about governance. He also asks questions about women's rights in particular.
Usman Sembene died in 2007, but continues to inspire a generation of cinematographers, including students of this cinema school in Dakar. Mamadou, who is training to become a script writer, idolizes Sembene as an artistic rebel who shook the industry.
Sembene's story is a bit like a dream come true. He was a child from the Casamance region who sent through a lot before becoming a writer and director. He's an inspiration for lots of people. He showed us that it's possible to succeed in both fields.
Usman Sembene directed 13 films and published a dozen books before passing away, aged 84.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Till then, take care.